The August heat in Miami didn't care that Adelaide Cross was sitting on a concrete curb in a $400 cocktail dress at 11:20 at night, blood on her lip, phone dead, and nowhere to go. 3 hours earlier, she had stood in the Brickell Grand Ballroom wearing that same dress, emerald silk draped over her full curves, the fabric catching the chandelier light in a way that had made her feel, for exactly one dangerous moment, like she deserved to be there. She had spent 3 years learning not to feel that way. Brenton had been a thorough teacher. The fundraiser had gone wrong before the appetizers hit the table. Addie remembered it in the disjointed way you remember a car accident, not a sequence of events but a series of impact points. Councilman Brenton Shaw's hand pressing too tight at the small of her back as he steered her toward the mayor's table, his voice dropping to a hiss at her ear. "Stop waddling. Walk like a person." The polite, sealed-off faces of the city's political donors, who had all gotten very good at pretending not to hear Brenton speak to his wife. Then the elevator, then the suite, then the manila envelope on the bed, and Brenton with his arms crossed and his campaign manager hovering in the doorway like he'd been told to stay for the show. "The DA's office gets those documents Monday morning," Brenton said, nodding at the envelope. "Your signature is on every one of them. You're the CPA of record on the Harborview accounts. You signed off on all of it." Addie had gone very still. "I signed what you put in front of me. You told me it was campaign disclosure." "You signed it." He said it the way you say case closed. "Your name, your credentials. You want to argue the fine print with a federal prosecutor, be my guest. Or," he pulled out a second document, slid it across the bedspread. "You sign that one too. It's a mutual non-disclosure. You walk away quiet. I make sure the DA's interest goes elsewhere." It was a divorce agreement already notarized, dated 2 months ago. "You planned this," she said, "not a question." "I planned everything," Brenton said. "That's what I do." She hadn't thrown anything, hadn't screamed. She'd picked up the manila envelope and pulled out the documents one by one, her forensic accountant's brain cataloging each page with a terrifying calm, and she'd said, "These are fraudulent. You know I can prove that." That was when Brenton's hand shot out. He didn't punch her. He was too careful for that, too conscious of the optics, but the shove sent her stumbling into the doorframe, his wedding ring catching the edge of her cheekbone. His campaign manager had looked away. Brenton Shaw straightened his tie. "You don't have your phone. You don't have your purse. Security is going to walk you to the street, and if you make a scene, I'm going to call the hotel manager and tell him my wife is having a psychological episode. You know who they'll believe." She knew. And that was how Adelaide Cross ended up on a Brickell sidewalk at 11:20 on a Tuesday in August. It's a city that didn't sleep and didn't care, with a bruise rising on her cheekbone and nothing in the world but the dress on her back and the exact contents of the Harborview construction accounts, stored in the kind of memory that doesn't forget numbers. She wasn't crying. She kept waiting for it, the collapse, the dissolution, the ugly heaving sobs that 3 years of systematic dismantling probably warranted. They didn't come. What came instead was a terrible, clarifying cold in the center of her chest, like something that had been pretending to be warm had finally given up the act. The sidewalk was still radiating the day's heat. A car alarm was going off somewhere on the next block. Addie sat with her knees drawn up, and her arms wrapped around them, and thought, with a strange, detached clarity, that she had a master's degree from Georgetown and had once identified the accounting irregularity that saved a Fortune 500 company from a 9-figure collapse, and she was sitting on a curb in a city that had no idea she existed. She didn't notice the cars until the second one pulled up. Not one vehicle, but 3. 2 black Escalades and a matte black G-Wagon that stopped at an angle that had nothing accidental about it. The doors opened in a staggered sequence. Men in dark suits stepped out, not rushing, the kind of unhurried movement that comes from being the most dangerous thing on any street you walk. Then the last door of the G-Wagon opened. The man who stepped out was tall in the way that had nothing to do with height, and everything to do with how he occupied space. Like the air around him had agreements with him the rest of the world wasn't party to. He was maybe 35, dark-haired, wearing a charcoal shirt with the sleeves rolled to the forearm, and he was looking at her with grey eyes that didn't have warmth in them, but had something more useful. Complete, unblinking attention. "Pike." His voice was low and even. "Who is that?" The large man who'd stepped out first crouched a few feet from Addie, looking her over the way a field medic looks at a casualty. Efficient, no pity. Woman, early 30s. Looks like she took a hit. No bag, no phone. She conscious. Yeah, boss. Then she's not a crisis. The man walked toward her, unhurried. He stopped 3 feet away and looked down at her, with the same calibrated attention he'd probably used to read a balance sheet. "You're bleeding." "I know," Addie said. Her voice came out steadier than she expected. "It's not bad." "It's bad enough." He glanced at the Brickell Grand's entrance. "You came from there." "I live there, lived there." She paused. "My husband owns the suite." Something shifted in those grey eyes. Not softness. Nothing that simple. More like recognition, the way a chess player looks when an opponent makes a move they'd anticipated 6 turns back. "Who's your husband?" She looked at him for a long moment. He was dangerous. She didn't need a biography to know that. The cars, the men, the particular quality of silence that gathered around him told her everything the nighttime streets of Miami needed to say. She thought about lying. She thought about it for exactly 2 seconds before her forensic accountant's brain reminded her that she was sitting on a sidewalk with no resources, a federal fraud charge being constructed around her name, and precisely nothing left to lose. "Brenton Shaw," she said, "city councilman, headed for the governor's office if you believe the press releases." The man was quiet for 4 full seconds. Then, "My name is Zane Morrow, and Brenton Shaw has been using my name to close deals I never agreed to." He crouched to her level, putting them eye to eye. Up close, the sharpness of his face was almost architectural. Jaw, cheekbone, the straight line of his nose. "I'm going to assume that's not a coincidence." "It isn't," Addie said. "He laundered $3 million through a construction shell company. Your name is on the investor prospectus as a silent partner. You didn't sign anything. I'd know. I'm the CPA who reviewed every document that man ever put in front of me. But your name is there, which means when the DA comes looking, they come for you too." Zane Morrow studied her face. She didn't look away. Her cheekbone throbbed. The heat sat on everything like a hand pressing down. "You're telling me this?" he said, "sitting on a sidewalk in a cocktail dress with a bruise on your face. I don't have anywhere else to be." He stood up, looked back at Pike for 1 second. Then he looked down at her again, and something in the set of his mouth settled into a decision. "Can you walk?" "Yes." "Good." He reached down, not tentatively, but with the absolute certainty of a man who had never in his life asked permission to act. His arm went behind her back, the other under her knees. Addie's whole body tensed against the expectation she had learned to carry like a second skeleton. The grunt of effort, the shift of complaint, the involuntary grimace that Brenton had perfected into an art form every time she required any physical assistance. Zane Morrow lifted her like it was nothing, not performatively, not with exaggerated ease. Just nothing, the simple unremarkable fact of a strong man picking up a person who needed to be carried. He didn't say a word about it. He walked to the G-Wagon, and Pike opened the door, and Zane set her carefully across the back seat and climbed in beside her with the composure of a man settling in for a board meeting. "Drive," he said. "Where?" Pike asked from the front. "The Coral Gables house, call Winslow." Addie sat in the cool leather dark of the SUV and watched the Miami lights blur past the tinted glass and felt the impossible, terrifying sensation of being safe. Not comfortable, not okay, but safe in the specific way that you can only recognize after years of its absence. Like oxygen after holding your breath so long, you forgot lungs were supposed to do something other than ache. She didn't cry then either. What she did was pull her knees to her chest and start running numbers in her head. The Harborview accounts. The invoice discrepancies she'd flagged 18 months ago and been told to ignore. The name Zane Morrow appearing in a prospectus she'd been handed last spring with a post-it note from Brenton's assistant. Standard silent partner, sign the disclosure line. She hadn't connected it then. She was connecting it now. Dr. Winslow was a small, precise woman with close-cropped silver hair who arrived at the Coral Gables house within 40 minutes and treated Addie's cheekbone, cracked left knuckle, and the friction burns on her palms with the brisk efficiency of someone who had patched up Zane Morrow's people before and asked exactly as many questions as were medically necessary. Which was none. Addie woke up in a guest room, the size of her college apartment, in a borrowed t-shirt and drawstring pants, with a glass of water on the nightstand and the faint, expensive smell of the house. Cedar, salt air, something that had nothing to do with hotels, surrounding her like a fact. For the first time in 3 years, nobody was going to walk through that door and tell her she took up too much space. She lay there for a long time, feeling the strangeness of that. Then she got up. By the second day, she was at a desk Zane had cleared for her in his study with a laptop, access to a secure line, and the kind of focused silence that expensive houses in Coral Gables do very well. She had asked for 3 things: public records access, an account at the Florida Division of Corporations database, and coffee that was actually strong. She got all 3 without commentary. Zane watched her the first morning from the doorway. He didn't interrupt. He came back at noon with a plate of food, set it beside her without speaking, and left. "You can sit down," Addie said without looking up from the screen. "I don't need an audience, but I don't need silence either." He sat across from her. "What are you looking for?" "The same thing I'm always looking for, the thing that doesn't add up." She scrolled through a column of invoices. "Brenton is meticulous. That's actually his problem. Meticulous people make the same move every time because they trust the move. He has a shell company registered in Delaware, but operating out of a mailbox in Hialeah. He ran $3 million in fraudulent invoices through it, inflated material costs, phantom subcontractors. And my name." "And your name?" She looked up. "As of Monday, the DA's office is going to receive a package of documents with my signature on the account authorizations. I signed what he told me to sign. I didn't know what I was signing until I started looking." A pause. "I should have looked sooner." Zane was quiet for a moment. "Why didn't you?" It was a straightforward question, without the accusation she'd braced for. She took a breath. "Because I spent 3 years being told I was lucky to have the life I had, that I wasn't smart enough for the details, that I should focus on the house and smile at the fundraisers and be grateful." She looked back at the screen. "I'm a forensic accountant with a master's degree from Georgetown, and I spent 3 years believing a city councilman who told me I was barely competent." Zane said nothing, but she felt his attention settle on her like something with weight, and it wasn't the weight she was used to. "What do you need from me?" he asked. "Your actual financial records for the past 2 years. If Brenton used your name on that prospectus, there's a paper trail, his end, not yours. I need to find where he created the association and how deep it goes." She met his eyes. "And I need to know. Is there anything on your end that can't survive daylight?" He looked at her for a long moment. The grey eyes did their unreadable thing. "Then nothing that touches this." "Then I can fix this," she said, "for both of us." He studied her face, the fading bruise, the set of her jaw, the absolute steady calm of a woman who had burned through every layer of fear and come out on the other side into something colder and more useful. "You're not what I expected," he said. "People never do," Addie said, and went back to work. On the 4th day, she found the other thing. She almost missed it. It was nested inside a subsidiary filing, the kind of document that gets processed automatically and lives at the bottom of a records search. A living trust, established 14 months ago, filed under the name of one Leah Porter, political consultant. The trustee signature was Addie's, her name, her credentials, her notary stamp. She had never signed it. She sat very still for a long time, staring at the screen. Outside, the Coral Gables afternoon was doing its relentless, beautiful thing, the bougainvillea going pink-orange against the white garden wall, the kind of scene that kept appearing on postcards as if the world were uncomplicated. The trust held $2.2 million in assets, mostly real estate, all of it in Addie's name, forged for the benefit of Brenton's girlfriend. She pulled up the dates. The trust had been filed 11 months after their wedding. Leah Porter had been in Brenton's calendar, managing his schedule, present at every event, for the entirety of their marriage. The life insurance policy she found 20 minutes later was almost an afterthought by then. The beneficiary breakdown was not subtle. 70% to Brenton, 30% to Leah Porter. The payout trigger was Addie's accidental death. The policy had been activated 6 weeks ago. 6 weeks. Around the time Brenton had started pushing her to take more evening walks alone. Around the time he'd suggested she use a parking garage 2 blocks away because you could use the exercise. Around the time a car had followed her 3 blocks before she'd dismissed it as Miami traffic. The terrible clarifying cold in her chest spread until it covered everything. She picked up the phone Zane had given her and texted him 2 words, "Come here." He arrived in 3 minutes. He read what she'd pulled up. She watched his face go through something she hadn't seen from him before. Not anger exactly, but the specific quality of stillness that comes right before it, the way a river goes flat before a dam breaks. "He priced your life," Zane said. His voice was very quiet. That was somehow worse than volume. $2.2 million in a trust for his girlfriend, plus the insurance payout. She kept her voice even. She was good at that. "He's been planning this longer than he's been planning the fraud." Zane turned to look at her. The grey eyes were doing something new, a kind of fierce, contained fury that wasn't directed at her, but was burning near enough to her that she could feel its heat. "What do you want to do?" Nobody had asked her that in a very long time. "I want to finish what I started," she said. "He's announcing his gubernatorial campaign Thursday. Press conference at the Hyatt Regency. Every camera in Miami will be there." She turned back to the screen. "I know exactly what documentation destroys a financial case, and I know exactly what documentation builds one." "You have 4 days," Zane said. "I'll need 3, she looked at him. "I need one more thing." "Name it." "I need to be in that room Thursday, when he's standing at the podium." Zane was quiet for a moment. Then the corner of his mouth moved, almost imperceptibly, in the direction of something that wasn't a smile but was adjacent to one. "I'll drive." She wore red on Thursday, not deliberately symbolic. It was the only thing from the hastily assembled wardrobe that fit her properly, a wrap dress in deep garnet silk that did what good clothes do, which is not hide the body inside them, but work with it. When Addie looked in the mirror that morning, she didn't do what she usually did, which was scan for the problems and catalogue what needed to be minimized. She looked at the full picture, the curve of her shoulder, the dark hair pinned back from her face, the woman staring back at her who had spent 4 days dismantling the financial architecture of her own betrayal. And she thought, there you are. Zane appeared in the doorway. He had on a dark suit, no tie, the particular quality of composed menace he carried the way other men carry cologne. He took one look at her and was quiet for a moment. "Ready?" he asked. "Very," she said. The Hyatt Regency ballroom was packed. Political operatives, press corps, city officials, the ambient energy of a campaign launch that had been 3 years in the making. Brenton Shaw stood at the podium in a navy suit, his campaign manager flanking him on the right. Leah Porter was positioned carefully to the left of the stage in a grey blazer, present but deniable. The advance team had set up a photo wall, bunting, the whole theatre of a man who believed his story was already written. Brenton was mid-sentence, something about the Miami we deserve, when the ballroom doors opened. Addie walked in. She walked the way she had learned to walk over the past 4 days, with the full weight of herself and no apology in the posture, shoulders level, chin up. She had a leather portfolio under her arm and a flash drive in her hand, and she walked directly to the press section, where a contact of Zane stood beside a laptop connected to the ballroom's AV system. Brenton's voice stopped mid-word. The silence that followed was the specific, electric silence of a room that knows it's witnessing something before it understands what. Addie. He said her name the way you say a problem out loud, hoping saying it will solve it. His face had gone the particular grey-white of a man whose planning has just encountered reality. "What are you doing here?" "Attending your press conference," she said clearly. The acoustics of the room were excellent. "I'm your wife. It would look strange if I weren't here." He looked at his campaign manager. "Get her out. She's not well, she's been." "Working," Addie said. "For 4 days. You'd be surprised what a forensic accountant can reconstruct from public records and a thorough understanding of how you think." She nodded at the AV contact. The projection screen behind the podium changed. The first slide was the Harborview Construction LLC filings. The second was the invoice records, with the phantom subcontractors highlighted in red. The third was Zane Morrow's name on the investor prospectus, with a side-by-side comparison to Zane's actual corporate filings. Different addresses, different dates, the fraudulent association obvious to anyone with functioning eyes. The fourth slide was the living trust in Leah Porter's name. The fifth was the life insurance policy, beneficiary breakdown, filling the screen at a size that left no room for uncertainty. The press moved immediately, not away but forward, phones and cameras out, the particular frenzy of people watching a story build itself in real time. Leah Porter had gone perfectly still at the side of the stage. Brenton made it 3 steps toward Addie before Zane materialized between them, with the suddenness of a man who had been prepared for exactly this. He didn't touch Brenton. He simply stood in front of Addie and looked at the councilman with a calm so absolute it was more frightening than any explicit threat. Councilman Shaw. Zane's voice was perfectly even. "Your investors in the Harborview project are going to want a conversation, particularly those whose names appeared on documents they never signed. A beat. I have copies of everything. So does the FBI field office on Brickell. They were delivered this morning." Brenton's face collapsed. Not dramatically. That was almost worse. It fell apart by fractions, the composure leaking out of it like pressure from a punctured line, until what was left was a man who looked exactly as small as he'd spent 3 years trying to make his wife feel. "You're done, Brenton," Addie said. She kept her voice level and clear, the way she kept it when presenting audit findings to a boardroom, the way she'd kept it through the fundraiser and the hotel suite, and every night she'd maintained her dignity by sheer force of quiet will. "Not because I ruined you, because you ruined yourself, and I just showed everyone where to look." He opened his mouth, closed it. His campaign manager had stepped back. The press was a wall of lenses. Zane looked back at Addie, a question in the grey eyes. "We're leaving," she said. He offered her his arm. She took it, resting her hand over his, feeling the solid reality of him beside her, the calm he broadcast like a signal. They walked back down the center of the room as the noise built behind them. Reporters calling questions, campaign staff splintering in 3 directions, the distant sound of Brenton's voice trying to restore order and failing. At the door, Pike fell into step beside them. "FBI just pulled up outside," he said. 2 vehicles. "Good," Addie said. They pushed through the doors and into the Miami afternoon, the September sun dropping gold light over the bay, the air carrying salt and the particular sweetness of a city that had just had its afternoon rearranged. Zane looked down at her. The grey eyes were still unreadable in most of their depths, but there was a quality in them now that hadn't been there 5 days ago. Something that had nothing to do with strategy, and everything to do with the specific way a man looks at a woman he has revised his entire understanding of. "What happens now?" he asked. Addie thought about the Georgetown degree she'd let gather dust. The forensic cases she'd set aside because Brenton said they made her difficult to live with. The version of herself she'd been before a man who needed her small had made her practice being small, so long she'd almost forgotten she was doing it on purpose. "Now," she said, "I go back to work." A silence. The bay glittered. Behind them, 50 yards back, FBI agents were getting out of vehicles. "The Coral Gables house," Zane said quietly, "has a second office, better monitors." Addie looked at him for a moment, reading the offer for exactly what it was and exactly what it wasn't, with the careful precision of a woman who had spent 4 days learning to read things clearly again. "I know," she said. "I already set it up." The corner of his mouth moved in that direction again, the one that wasn't quite a smile. He opened the car door. She got in, and he got in beside her, and Miami kept its agreement with the afternoon light, indifferent as always, and Adelaide Cross watched the Hyatt Regency shrink behind the tinted glass, and thought about how a woman's worth is not a number a man assigns her, not a signature he forges in her name, not a dress size or a carefully constructed illusion of adequacy. It is what she knows, it is what she builds, it is what remains standing when someone burns everything else to the ground to find out. She had always been standing, she just finally had room to show it.